Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to Social Convos. I'm your host Diego, together with my co-host Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc, how are you doing this week? It's December.
Wow, it's December. I'm in call still for for the Surifesta for the end of the year celebrations in Suriname, which
It's
kind of
after 2 years, yeah?
yes, after 2 years, it's the first time we get to celebrate the end of the year in the inner city this year. And even though I don't have any operational tasks at hand, I do have a lot of communication and PR stuff going on. So that makes it really busy. And yes, for people that are wondering in Suriname specifically, if we will have Oruyari, yes, it's official. There will be a Oruyari celebration, a public Oruyari celebration. So that's the thing. But I mean, we're keeping with the topic of mental health. So we're excited to introduce a brand new guest today as well. So, Diego, do you feel it's time to already introduce our guest?
Yeah, definitely. And I was looking at the intro she sent when she signed up, and what caught my eye was she'll mention this later probably herself, but we're gonna talk with a brave, wise woman. What does
Brave,
that mean?
wise women. So, okay, so let's get into us. Our guest for today is Jen, and Jen is a master coach who empowers women to reclaim their truth, forge a more loving relationship with themselves, and live an authentic, brave life. She's also a yoga teacher, and she's the author of the new book, Brave, Wise Women: Transform the Fallout of Your Breakup into Your Power. So, basically, we're going to learn today how to deal with life situations. And without further ado, let's bring her in. Hi, Jen. How are you doing?
Hey, all right, good. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're doing great. We were just discussing in the pre-talk that it's still light outside, and for us that's kind of confusing because for us it's dark everywhere. But so how are you doing this week? How is it going so far?
Yeah, it's a big week all around. Lots to do, no rest, and lots of new things too. So great
Okay.
opportunities for learning.
So we're big travelers, so we always want to know like what part of the US are you in? Have you lived there your whole life?
Okay.
What kind of stories, travel stories would you like to discuss or tell us as well?
All right, beautiful. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was born and raised in the city of San Francisco, which is kind of a big thing here. Usually, a lot of people will say, I'm from San Francisco too. And most people, you say, oh, yeah, where? And they say, well, and they'll name like another part of the Bay Area, but not San Francisco. But I'm tried and true right in the city of San Francisco. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, but I've done a lot of traveling. Um, yeah, I've traveled to like Australia, to Mexico many times, and I have a little story to share about that. Been to Europe, been to Polynesia, French Polynesia, Borea and Bora Bora and Moorea, and yeah, I love to travel and happy to be where I'm at right now. It's very grounding.
So, what's so special about the Bay Area? Because that's one of the if people mention San Francisco, it's usually the Bay Area. What's so
Yeah.
special about there?
Oof. It's a very unique city. I think there's a lot of lore, a lot of history here, and the architecture is pretty unique. The hills are very, it's very hilly here, and a lot of Victorian homes. And um, there's also Silicon Valley here, so a lot of tech companies. So there's a lot of like, places where the big companies, Apple, the Facebooks, those kind of play. Well, maybe it's not Facebook anymore, but all the big companies have been headquartered for a while. So I think there's just aside from the history behind the city and the gold rush era, there's just and then the Hate Street and the hippie and the 60s and 70s and all of that. So it's just like it attracts a lot of people here that are they want to come live here. Cosmopolitan city.
So basically, a rich history that has changed a lot over the
Yes.
decades.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We're definitely gonna do some overrated, underrated, Diego. So Jen,
Okay.
we're gonna try for the last
I
10
love
minutes,
it.
5, 10 minutes. We're gonna do some
Okay.
overrated, underrated, and get your opinion of certain typical
Okay.
things that are from the West Coast.
Okay.
But let's get a little bit into the conversation because you've been personally to a lot. We spoke on Saturday talking a little bit about your own personal development and getting into your why, basically, like trying to figure out more how you are. And could you tell us a little bit more, like your personal experience when you realize, like, hey, this is, I do have to look in the mirror and figure out where I want to go with my life. So what kind of motivated or stimulated that decision to dive deeper into yourself?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I think everybody is on their own journey with this in some way or another. And I would say that my personal development journey started many, many years ago. I first started practicing yoga about 20 something years ago. And I would say that was sort of my first entree into really trying to understand who I am. And over the years, I've dabbled with a lot of different kinds of modalities. So, for example, having my astrology chart read, or doing an aura reading, or just these various ways and to figure out who I am. And as time went on, I started to notice the trajectory of my life just being one of keeping myself small, while I observed people around me doing different things with their life that were probably, in some people's opinions, much bigger. And that sort of was like a lingering question in the back of my head about why is this so? And it wasn't until I ended up going through a painful divorce that I started to ask the question, who am I? Like, really, who am I? And why am I the way I am? And so I ended up taking myself down a path of pure inquiry and curiosity. It was very intuitive. And I ended up learning a lot about my patterns and my unconscious beliefs and things that were really drivers for why my life looked the way it did. So,
I wanna elaborate on the part of that the environment you kind of felt small, or
yeah,
that looking at what other people's do, it's bigger. So just for context, we're based in Suriname, and basically looking outside in, you'd consider the population here like a village, like 500,000, a bit more than 500,000. If we look
mhm,
at California, that's like a few tens of millions, if I'm not mistaken. And stacking up on that, as you mentioned, you're born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, having that, such a rich city with all the tech headquarters. Has that
yeah,
environment kind of played a role in enhancing that feeling of kind of you're like a small fish in a huge pond, and then kind of
yeah.
that having that constant comparison? Like, how has that environment
Yes.
influenced that?
Yes, yes. Our context is everything, really. If we can even like bump that back up to the family dynamics, right? So I come on my father's side. There's a lot of prominent people in his lineage who, singers, architects, artists, famous in the country he was born, and so we're born into parental beliefs and the way that they see their children, see life for their children. And not that my parents ever pressured me to do anything, big like that, but these are all parts of the fabric of who we are, where we come from, our lineage. And then, of course, like you said, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of competition here, a lot of people innovating and doing big things. And uh, so on a friend level, for instance, when I look at like the immediate surrounding, I would see people progress in their career in a certain way, right? And if you are desiring for those things in your life and you believe that those things are going to give you meaning, then there's probably a likelihood of comparison and saying, well, they're doing big things and I'm doing this over here, right? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of does, because like uh, environment can play a huge role in someone's,
Yeah.
the messaging you get.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%.
But is there also kind of like a facade, like people are like, especially in Cali, I think like it's like you have to have a successful lifestyle, otherwise it's like, and we experience this like our generation, but especially the new generations, like we have people at work that are like, wait, this person is 16 years old and already a millionaire. What am I
Yeah.
doing with my life? And then not taking into context, we already kind of mentioned the context that like those, like most people that achieve these kind of successes, it's a generational thing. So their parents or somebody within their family gave them opportunities that otherwise
Yeah.
wouldn't be available. But I think there's also another dynamic that I'm interested in, and that's like more of a um, a personal perspective as well.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
being small, even in relationships, whether it's with your spouse or with friends, it's like to what extent or is it important for you to be considered the successful one in the group, or is it something like I don't feel the need for it because I want to serve somebody else? So how does that change as well? And I'm always curious because people always say, yeah, something happens in your life. In this case, it was you getting into a divorce and then realizing like, okay, I had to change myself. But then I always wonder, what's the first step? Like, is it like a spark, an inner spark that happens? Is it like a certain pattern that you change, or even just a routine, or something small that changes that kind of gradually starts snowballing into something big? Or is it just a
Yeah.
drastic change that you're like, from this day on, I'm gonna change this completely, and you make the shift?
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of a big question. Our identity is formed early on, through our family, a relation with our environment, like we were talking about, our context. And we, to the point that you were bringing up, this facade, we end up adopting masks to end up getting our needs met in our childhood, right? When our needs are not met, for example, I became the good girl, so to get my needs met, and the good girl who had to perform. So the one who was got good grades, who made her bed every single night, who never had her stuff laying all over the house. We're always trying to get our needs met. And there's always ways that our parents, as well-meaning as they can be, right, that it just doesn't happen. And so over time, we take in information that forms beliefs about who we think we need to be in order to have certain things in our life. And to this point that you asked about, like, well, what's the first step? Well, really, it's a personal question. For some people, it can be a catalyst, like something big that happened in their life. Like for me, mine was my divorce. And for other people, it could be something that's just nagging at them, like something isn't working anymore about wearing that mask and operating their life through that mask. And it's almost like there's a seed of like a divine blueprint inside of us. Our soul is waiting to be born in some ways, right? And when we wear a mask, we're actually keeping ourselves from tapping into our own authenticity. We're not fully expressed in the world. So at some point, it's like we kind of hit this roadblock where it's like, something's not really working for me anymore, and I don't really want to operate this way. And the thing is we can take these steps. For example, let's just say you want to lose weight. Okay. So you're like, all right, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to start eating chicken every night or whatever. Right. But then, like, that is great. And sometimes what ends up happening is we have unconscious beliefs about who we are or how we need to be that can interfere with our ability to make progress. So it's kind of a both and, right? We need to look inside and look a little closer at the same time that we're also taking steps towards where we think we want to go. Start exploring that.
What before we go deeper into how would you describe being brave? What's brave to you?
Brave is doing things that you never thought you would do and fully stepping into it wholeheartedly, knowing that there's fear there, but the fear is no longer something that holds you back. And for example, being on this podcast, great example of being brave, great example of doing something I never thought I would do before and being excited about it rather than terrified.
It's kind of stepping out of your comfort zone. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. And does this mean that because you know your why you're doing it, it makes it easier to take that kind of leap of faith that you're able because you're like, okay, I'm doing it for this reason. Or is there other internal motivator that helps as well?
Yeah, no, for me, in the context of my life and where I'm coming from, right? Having a why and having a North Star definitely makes it more of a grounded experience. I'm connected to it in a different way than if I was just trying something on for size, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because there's different, I guess, adjectives that people can use, like brave, courage, and then in the context of stepping out of your comfort zone, like, does this have to do with like overcoming your fear or that discomfort, or is it more of a new experience? Like, I know it's always a matter of context, right? Because if you it depends on how you react to situations. So you can be brave, but the emotions you feel or that someone feels can be the same. And then even if you are brave, there is still fear that plays a role. Even if you are courageous, there's still fear. Even if you're, you know, uh, trying to be empathetic or caring, there is also uh, that discomforting feeling. Like, how do I guess I'm going to label them positive and negative emotions. What's the dynamic between those two from what you've seen or what
Yeah.
you experience?
Yeah. Well, emotions aren't really good or bad. We get those labels from messages we learn in childhood. Don't cry, you're not supposed to be angry, that's where we learn those messages. Emotions just are emotions. They're neutral. And so it's really all about how we make meaning of them and what we are taught to suppress and or release. So so for me personally, okay, courage is feeling a lot of fear, and you've heard the phrase, I'm sure, like feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I think bravery is really something that is a little bit more innate inside of us. Like, we all have the capacity to be brave, and when hard pressed for it, we will just be brave. We'll just do it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm happy to elaborate if you're interested.
Yeah, no. The reason I'm bring this up because I'm a uh, huge Tim Ferriss, like, yeah, basically his books and content kind of guided my trajectory in life generally. And one of the topics he talks about, there's a TED talk about this, is his concept about fear setting. And basically, when he needs to make decisions, big decisions especially, it can be small decisions, he goes down like, what's the word? The exercise basically is, what's the worst that could happen if this were to happen? What's the worst that could happen? And then by writing all those fears and objectively reflecting on that,
Yeah.
The feeling kind of diminishes it, because like, oh, that's the worst that could happen. Yeah, you didn't get a job, a new opportunity opens up. So that's why I was trying to kind of see that dynamic between fear and in this case bravery or courage. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that the emotion and this feeling in the body around like anxiety and fear is also the same feeling in the body that we have when we're excited, right? So again, it comes down to like, what are we making it mean? And yeah, what are those worst case scenarios that can happen? You know, Forgetting what you're going to say, or being laughed at by your friends, or these are all things that will raise our anxiety. And we have to ask ourselves, what's really true? Is it really true that all your friends are going to laugh and not want to be your friend anymore? you know is it really true? And then the other thing is like our relationship to failure. A lot of us get the message, and I know this is true for me, that it wasn't okay to fail. Like, failing is not a good thing. Like, it's going to feel like death if I fail. The worst things can happen. And maybe things did happen in childhood for some people where failure was punished in a certain way, right? But if we look at failure like opportunities to learn, right, then it takes away, it's like sort of reframing really what is failure, and sort of decreasing that level of anxiety that runs through the body when we're feeling fear.
Okay, I want to make a quick bridge here because I do love the fact that you say that emotions are like neutral, and it's like how we go about it. I that's definitely something I'm gonna remember from now on. But I also want to talk a little bit about failure because I'm gonna make a quick bridge. So there's a quite a famous epic rap battles of history between Thomas Edison and help me out here, Nikola Tesla. And I think there's a famous quote by Edison that says, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." And
Mm,
it's a really strong premise. And then the quote it kind of loses its value because the way he found it to work was steal ideas and inventions from others. But aside from aside from that, the reason why I bring that up because I find it interesting is what's wise, because we've just discussed brave, and now what's wise, because if you say like emotions are neutral, we get kind of impulses from different spaces, so you need a little bit of wisdom to guide yourself in your life. But for you,
yeah.
what does wise imply for you?
Wisdom implies that we're learning from our choices, and that there's always a lesson. Everything around us is a teacher. Okay, what we have in our life, what we don't have in our life, what happens to us, what doesn't happen to us, who's in our life, relationships, everything around us is here to teach us. And if we're not looking at life that way and not looking for the lessons in our choices, then we aren't really sort of we're sort of like not able to develop that knowledge, that wisdom that comes from having had that experience, or having learned about whatever didn't happen to us that we wish happened.
I would I loved how you framed it, like wisdom is basically based on the things we've experienced, because yeah, knowledge is one thing, wisdom is knowing how to apply that
Yeah.
knowledge, and you
Yeah.
know uh, how to integrate it. And
Yeah.
basically the other word that immediately comes to mind, because we're playing with a lot of descriptive words here, like, is intuition. And then
Yeah.
with wisdom, then you people usually call it a gut feeling, right? Because you see something happening, but your intuition says that. But can you make the bridge between intuition and wisdom, and how people can, I guess, develop that intuition to make more sensible choices, so to speak? Doesn't
Yeah.
have to be the correct choice, but the more sensible choice.
Yeah. So are wisdom and intuition mutually exclusive?
I would mutually exclusive, being there's no overlap. No, I would say there's an overlap. There,
Yeah.
in most cases, yeah, there should be an
Yeah.
overlap. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that there's some truth in that, at least for me, right? What's true for you may not be true for me or for Jean-Luc, but um, uh, intuition is something I believe we all have. Some of us have more of a connection to it than others. And I am on a journey with my own intuition and really beginning to trust it. Whereas before, I didn't really trust it. I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of doubt, a lot of asking other people for their opinion because I couldn't trust my own answers. And it's been especially in the past year that I've really been able to tap into intuition and learning to trust myself and allowing that to be a guide. Um, so, there's different wisdom centers in the body from my perspective, right? There's what happens in the head, and then there's what everything else happens below the head. And we're such a society that is constantly taking in information. We're on our phones, we're absorbing news, we're constantly living through our head, and we don't give ourselves time. It's a society that values productivity, so we don't always give ourselves, and of course I'm speaking in gross generalizations because there are people out there who do take a lot of time to really tap in, go inside, and really, for example, they might meditate, right? So there is some truth to removing some distractions from your life and getting quiet with yourself and trusting and listening for what is trying to speak through you. Intuition isn't fear. It's not something that, has a lot of anxiety around it. It just sort of is. It's almost neutral. It's something inside of you that you're like, yeah, no, that feels right, you know? So I'll give you an example. One of the biggest decisions I've made for my life right now is I'm going to move to another country. And that decision would normally in the past have been something like calling all my friends. What do you think? Oh my God, do the research. Where am I? What does this mean? How do I go about doing that? Et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in this particular case for me, I just had an intuitive hit like, no, this is happening. I'm supposed to go down there and I'm going to go do it for this much time. And I just decided for the first time in my life, I just acted completely on intuition, and I was able to manifest a place to stay. And I'm not looking back. Like this is what's happening. I'm going to go live here for the next 3 months, and I'm actually excited about it. So, but it took a lot for me to kind of get there. That's a process. That's not something that, I probably would have been able to do in the past had I not done the initial wave
Yeah.
of healing that I did on my own. And then, of course, the work I did this year as well, which was hugely transformative.
But in short, it is something that we can all develop over time. Some people are more in tune earlier at the
Yeah.
stages of life, and this is based on experience and I guess events that happen in your life from which you become wiser, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, at least for me, right? It's like learning to trust my intuition. So it shows up in coaching sometimes for me. Is I'm working with a client and something comes up and I'm like, okay, this feels like the right direction to go. And the more I practice stepping into that, and the more I start to see like what happens when I do, then I start to collect evidence that, okay, my intuition is something that I can start to trust. And then I try it on again and, just start to apply it, whether it's coaching with clients or, in just my life. And interactions with friends or family, decisions I make, you know?
So I start to wonder now, like what the because we often don't use our intuition because of a certain fear. And we've already discussed like parenting and like not necessarily that like your parents want the best for you. That's
Yes.
I want the best for my kids.
Yeah.
But still there will be situations where um, my children in the future will be afraid to use their intuition because of a social construct that either
Yeah.
I, my wife, or somebody else created for them.
Yeah.
So, so how like when you're stuck, you have to first realize that you're in a social construct, of course. But like, where do you draw the line? For instance, like how much of wisdom is intuition, and how much wisdom is, for instance, common sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. I think we all have to decide that for ourselves. I know somebody, for instance, where his gut is very strong and he acts often based off of his intuition. And he doesn't, he operates from that space primarily versus someone like me that might try to get more information in order to make a decision or have historically operated that way. The way I'm going about it now is, allowing there to be space for both. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I think it's
okay.
that the biggest worry is always the fears. Like
Yeah.
when you think of it, like I took a lot of like big jumps in my life. For instance, I'm 18 years old. I'm going into my first year of university in Tilburg, and I stumble across a marketing association, and I see an opportunity to go travel. And I'm like, hey, I want to become part of your student organization just for this project. Is that okay? And they're like, okay, there is some vetting process, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. And I ended up uh, being the treasurer of a project at age 18 of a project that was over 40,000 US in total. The budget was 40,000 US in total at 18-year old, and I was the treasurer for that project. And we went to China for a month, a complete month.
Amazing.
I got to celebrate my 19th birthday in China, and I occasionally do these things where I just take leaps for others. Those are like, I'm not gonna do that. But then there are like really simple things where I just mentally can't change my mind, and there's an unknown fear that I just can't change a simple thing in my life because of a fear that I can't even identify. So,
Mhm.
so what practical tips do you have for people that, especially if they want to change something, they want to be brave, but they're not even sure what they're afraid of?
Yeah. One of
So
my
is it
favorite, go ahead.
sorry, yeah, just to add to that, so is it the fear of the unknown that's scarier, or the fear of if you know what it is but making the change that's scarier? Like,
Yeah. 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 And potentially the fear of failure too. Right. I mean, fear can be different things for different people. And so one way that um, I like to work with people and or even with myself is to start to get to know the fear. Because I think sometimes when we make fear bad or we make failure bad, then it has like a stronger energy to it. And so these are different parts of ourselves that are coming forward, something that maybe part that wants to protect us from something, right? So it's more about like befriending the fear and getting to know it. Fear can show up in your body and it has signals in your body. It's like getting to know what those signals are and how you feel them. And usually there's a message in the body that will come forward. Like I say, we're used to operating here, and there's a whole wisdom center that sits below the neck that half the time we're not even in tune with. because we're so busy being productive and doing all the things that, getting quiet and being with what is sitting inside of us, ready to give us a message is 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 like a huge thing for some people to be able to make that shift. Because I think the more that we try to like work out fear in our mind, the more anxious we become. Anxiety is just fear, right? So the more we start to worst case scenario or overthink, right? That's all fear. That's anxiety. So the more we can just come back to the body and just explore what is sitting in the body around that. There's other modalities and stuff that I use, but I would say that is the biggest thing, is really bringing the fear in closer and getting to know it.
In the context of getting to know your body and the signals it receives, like how does yoga play a role in this? Because you mentioned in the beginning, if I remember correctly, you've done yoga for over 20 years
Yeah.
now. Like, and also in the context of, because you also mentioned it's only quite recently that you've kind of been more in tune with your intuition. Like, how has yoga played a role in that transformation in understanding these signals in your body?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Gosh, I'm gonna have to travel back in time here, but there's a lot that gets stored in our bodies. Emotions that are unprocessed get stored in our body. Trauma can be stored in our body, and energy that isn't being expressed gets stored in our body. And the practice of yoga is a body-based experience. So when we're disconnected from our body and now we're starting to, get into these positions, we're being asked to do a down dog, and wow, my knees don't bend because my hamstrings are tight. It can be very humbling, and but yoga can start to unlock the stored energy and the stored emotions or stored memories that are in the body. And so there's a way that, like it starts to unlock. Like I've had experiences, I don't know if either of the two of you practice yoga, but I know I've had experiences, and I know many other yoga practitioners who have as well, where you're in a pose and all of a sudden you just start crying. You just start crying, and don't know where it's coming from. And frankly, you don't even need to. You just need to know that it was time for whatever was being held inside to come out. And so the more that we start to pay attention, because you're constantly in yoga also being cued. Put your arms this way, move your feet this way, right? Turn your knee out, so you're being asked to take your attention from here and place it into the body. And for a lot of people, it's the first time that they're really paying attention to their breath, to what's happening in the body, the way they hold themselves in the world. And so, yoga just starts to make those connections, a little bit more of a mind-body connection. And I forgot what I was going to say, but hopefully that's enough.
No, I'm
Answers your
gonna
question.
jump into this because now I want to know, like, people who find yoga boring and are not willing to do that. Is that also impartially because they don't want to be vulnerable, or
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, could it be that the fear of being invulnerable and finding out that there's actually something there that will change? How much do you think that accounts for people being like, yeah, I'm not into that?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think what happens in yoga is that there's a couple things that I notice. People who don't practice yoga, well, I won't go to yoga because I can't even touch my toes. That's usually what I hear. And the irony around that is everybody who goes to yoga feels that way for the first time. Touching your toes isn't something you do the first time you go to yoga. It's something that potentially works itself out over a regular practice, right? So, so that's the first thing. I think that there's a fear in that vulnerability, especially if you are someone who compares yourself to other people, or you feel competitive. There's that potential for that physical vulnerability. The other thing about that is, just like I say, there's that potentially that emotional vulnerability. But I think the entree into yoga oftentimes is not that I want to start practicing yoga because I want to know my emotions. That's usually not the first connection. It's usually something physical. Oh, I've heard it's a great workout. There's a lot of different like layers to what people discover about yoga, the more that they practice. And that's the thing about yoga too, is yoga is really a practice that is learning about yourself. Like I say, like if you subscribe to the belief that everything around you is a mirror, right? So even how you practice yoga and how you are with yourself on the mat is showing you something about who you are. And there was a long time in my practice where my ego was very present on the mat. I was very, very, because of this, in my childhood, I learned performance equals approval equals love, right? It's how I got my needs met. I got to be the good student. I got praise from my parents, right? So in yoga, it's kind of a similar thing. Like, okay, I'm just going to, I see all these people doing cool things on the mat and I'm going to do that too. And, I'm going to show them that I belong here. I can do this too, and that sort of comparison. And I was breathing really heavily on the mat, and it was very forceful, very much like I was asserting my right to be there. And it took, and I actually write about this in my book. I talk about this moment. There was one time I was 7 years into my practice when a yoga teacher came up to me and said, he just knelt down really quietly next to me while I was doing down dog. And he said, an advanced yogi softens her breath. And I'm like, well, what does he mean by that? I really didn't know. I thought this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, this is what a yogi does. They breathe really loud and they do all the forceful poses and they do all the arm balances and, they move strong and, hard. And I really actually let that sink in. I let it really sink in, and I start to become curious about that. And I started to experiment with like, okay, well, what does this mean? Soften the breath, like, okay. I started to breathe a little bit more softer, a little bit more quietly, a little bit more attention paid on the breath, paid to my breath, and less absorbed in my mind with how does my warrior two pose look compared to everybody else, right? I started to really pay attention inside. And what ended up happening is that I ended up developing this like beautiful relationship with my breath where I allowed it to let me move my body on the mat rather than me trying to force the breath and force myself into different poses. I just allowed it to soften how I approached my yoga practice. And I began to see that that mirroring of that egoic state of needing to compare, needing to compete, and needing to show that I belong here and I can do this too. I started to notice that off the mat as well, because how we do one thing is how we do everything, right? So
It's basically
yeah,
that
so there's
small change in breathing kind of change the direction of the mirror. Whereas from what I'm hearing is trying to assert that external validation, kind
yes,
of flip the mirror aside to be more conscious. And this comes back to you mentioned mind body connection, and I'm trying to link this back to the emotion part from listening to you, like
mm-hmm.
from what I'm getting here or how I'm interpreting it is like because you're so consciously moving, more consciously breathing and moving your muscles in certain ways. It kind of energy that energy is kind of being forced to activate, whereas our everyday stuff, just walking, brushing your teeth, has been automated
Yeah,
in the sense that it has become a habit where while these cells in your body kind of don't work anymore and they just go into a kind of hibernation mode, if I had to draw that analogy.
yeah, it does start to impact how you are off the mat. I started noticing just with that one example that I was able to move more fluidly on the mat. And I moved to my own pace. I started moving, this feels good to be moving a little slower than the rest of the class. And I was breathing very steadily, slowly. So I began to sort of turning that attention inward on the breath and allowing it to move my body in a way that felt good to me. I started to become more connected to my needs and my wants, and just how I was in the rest of the started to affect the way I was in the rest of the world. But it's just one layer, we're multi-layered beings, right? And that's just one layer.
I do want to quickly jump into the sinking in process. Just out of curiosity, was the person that told you that, like the breathing thing, was that somebody you looked up to? Was it a random person that you didn't know quite well? So like I'm kind of interested because I'm also kind of interested in like how people
Like
to react to feedback and
that
what
relationship, like
was
how,
there.
yeah.
Was there something in the relationship that you let it sink in, or was it just were you in a time and space where you were open for that kind of feedback? Because I can imagine, even from personal experience, that sometimes you're not open to that feedback. So I'm kind of curious to the situation.
Yeah, that's such a great question. This was a yoga teacher, okay? And to be honest, it wasn't somebody that I practiced with before. Um, but it was interesting that it came from a male. And uh, that's like a bigger story, but it came from a man who said an advanced yogi softens her breath. And it wasn't, like I say, so it wasn't like I knew him very well or took a lot of classes, trusted his teaching or anything. I would really say in this particular case that it was a time and space thing. I was like ready for it. I think when we're ready for things, that's when they start to appear. You know, Readiness is everything to me, right? We can be shown something or told something. And like you say, you're like, whatever, dude. Like you don't even want to pay
Yeah,
attention.
yeah,
Whatever, I'm not
sure,
there.
sure.
I'm happy in my little space over here being, forceful on the mat or whatever. But
I'm performing.
there's
Let me perform.
yeah, exactly. I'm performing. I'm performing here, dude. But I can remember at that time too. I had just transitioned out of a certain yoga studio, and I was experimenting with going to different yoga studios. I was only practicing at one studio for many, many years. And at this particular time, I was starting to branch out and, just starting to want more for my practice, even though I didn't know exactly what that was.
It's basically
And
looking
so
for other experiences, stimulation,
yeah,
and
other influences to come in.
input.
So
Yeah.
I think it was just timing, it was just timing, and I was willing to look at it.
And that was basically coming back to the word, like the brave move to do, going out there. So I want to go back to the actual title of the book, like Brave Wise Woman. So now in the complete title, like what is a brave wise woman? And it's funny that you mentioned that, it was a male who kind of gave you that feedback.
Yeah.
So yeah, in your words, how would you describe a brave wise woman?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say that a brave wise woman, there's a few things. They take responsibility for their healing. They know themselves deeply. They trust the process. They look within for their answers. They shift whatever is unhelpful in their life, whether it's a belief or a pattern. They learn from their choices, honor themselves, speak their truth, forgive, and practice bravery every day.
Awesome. Before we jump in to where we can actually read more into this and find out more, uh, we quickly want to do. I think Diego, there's time for two over unders each.
Um, yes, but I actually have one more burning
You
question.
have a burning question, then we'll do
Yeah,
the over under, and then we'll get
yeah.
to the closing with the book. Okay,
Because
go ahead, Diego.
after
Go
that
ahead.
beautiful description and of what a brave wise woman is, and I want to relate this to because to the man side. So I've seen. Are you familiar with Stoicism? The Stoic term. It's basically um, regulating your emotions, kind of being more reactive, or not reactive, but assessing the situation calmly and not having outside influences influence you to make rash decisions, right?
Okay.
Um, and from what I followed through history, it's usually men who have this practice, and I'm wondering, like, is it different, like how men and women approach emotions and
Mm,
feedback in that sense?
yeah. Yeah.
Basically, can women be
Interesting.
stoics?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think with men, we're kind of getting more into like, patriarchy and toxic masculinity and so forth, right? But a lot of men get the message in their lives that it's not okay to feel, it's not okay to cry, right? And that men have to be a certain way, masculine has to look a certain way. And that in an unhealthy way shows up like control or dominance, aggression, violence, intolerance. um, so so back to your question about men and women, right? um, it doesn't mean that women or female or identifying as the feminine um, won't also have experiences growing up where they were told their emotions are not welcome or they need to suppress them or um, any other message that goes along with that. So I think like our relationship to our emotions I don't think it's like male or female specific, but and non-binary, etc. But um, um, it all comes from like what we learn and what we're told is appropriate.
Yeah, this comes back to Jean-Luc's. I always like when he uses this word, this social construct that has been
Yeah,
developed over the years on
yeah,
how.
You want to open a can of worms that, unfortunately for
No,
today,
yeah,
we're not we're
well,
not gonna open up.
yeah,
But
but
yeah. It's a big
yeah,
topic for sure,
yeah.
for
yeah,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
All
And
right.
I'm not going to claim to be an expert here, right?
yeah.
So on that, but yeah, yeah.
Let's go to the overs unders.
A little bit more
Yeah.
lighthearted.
Why don't you
So,
introduce
welcome to
this? Yeah.
Overrated, Underrated. It's basically a concept where we ask you to create a social construct for a certain topic. Basically, we're gonna call something out, and you get to decide whether or not you feel that it is currently overrated or currently underrated. And
Okay.
since we've talked a lot about yoga, let's start with yoga for weight loss.
Overrated.
Coming back to where you grew up in your hometown, the Golden State Bridge, is that overrated or underrated?
Golden Gate Bridge, right?
Oh, Golden
Yeah.
Gate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah.
I mean, it's
As a
beautiful.
yeah, because that's usually the photos you see, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'll say it's underrated.
All right.
Okay. You kind of stole my question there, but you know, it's fine. Um,
I have a tendency to
figuring
do
out
that. That's
your
why I let him go
figure,
first.
yeah, figuring out your North Star.
Ah, underrated. That can have such a powerful effect on your life when you find it.
Hollywood, underrated or overrated?
Overrated.
Are we talking about Hollywood as the concept or Hollywood Boulevard?
Well,
Either way.
there you go. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Keep in mind I'm
Uh,
from Northern California though, so there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how about just to close up to go full circle, how much of a rivalry is there between cities in Cali?
Well, they're totally different cultures, right? And I think because Hollywood has such a huge influence in Southern California, there is a different, tends to be a different mindset down there, let's just say. Um, but who knows anymore? At least that's how it was when I was growing up.
Yeah. Okay, and then if you go more down south, San Diego, there's also a different kind of
Yeah.
atmosphere there as well, which is
Yeah.
interesting. But I
Yeah.
think we covered enough about the West Coast. So let's quickly go back to your book because that's finally the thing you're here. You're releasing your book, Brave Wise
Yeah.
Women,
Yeah.
this December. What can you
Yeah.
tell us about it? What do you want to share as final information before we plug it in and tell people where they can find it? What's one thing you do
Yeah.
want to share about the book?
Yeah. I'd say the biggest takeaway here is that I really want to encourage other women to start to do their inner work and to look more deeply at who they are. I believe that we all have, an innate curiosity within us that can actually be a teacher if we start to leverage it and ask important questions. And when we think about like the state of the world today, right, I feel like, you know, there's a lot of need here for to have more powerful feminine energy in the world so we can start to contribute to healing everything that's going on in this world. So my book is really a examination of this intuitive journey that I went on to know myself and ask the questions, who am I and do I even love myself? And I just give them a snapshot of the catalyst that sort of led me there. And then I share the 8 lessons I learned about healing, um, and give each chapter, each lesson has a simple practice to encourage people to try to um, to really start to get to know who they are.
And you can find that on, you do you have a website where we can
Yeah,
direct people to?
December 20th, you'll be able to find it on Amazon.
All right. But in the meantime, Jen also has a website. That's
Yeah,
jenlegaspi.com,
yeah,
GenLegaspi.com. And if you go /book, you can read a bit ahead of time before it drops on Amazon.
yeah,
I,
amazing.
I'm laughing. This is an inside. Sorry, Jan, but this is an inside because I'm reading your name and on the last 3 letters, I'm reading smart passive income instead
Wait, what?
of yeah, the SPI. I'm reading. Yeah, I'm reading SPI as in smart passive income. Sorry, but that's just my marketing brain's kind of like imploding a bit. But Jen, we want to thank you so much for
Yeah,
being our guest on today's podcast.
thank you.
I think there's a lot of great information. I hope that people get the opportunity to buy your book. Like you mentioned, it will be available on Amazon from December 20th.
Yeah.
You will be able to do it. Just a quick question: is there a part two coming after this? How was the experience of writing a book?
Yeah, the experience of writing a book was so deeply transformative. It was like if I would never publish it, I got so much out of writing a book. It was deeply, deeply, deeply transformative. And I healed a lot of relationships, especially the relationship with my father, just in the process of writing the book. He died while I was writing. Um, so I just feel like sharing my story and sharing, all the things I learned about myself and what it's like to uncover those unconscious beliefs and patterns that were impacting my romantic life. It's just, I think, valuable for other people to see how it can be done, and it can be done on your own. You can go ahead and start today, and start looking at what's not working. Um, yeah. So will there be a part two? Probably. We'll see. Brave Wise Woman goes on an adventure.
Hey,
Well,
that's a
yeah,
great plug.
the message has been sent loud and clear. Basically, be brave.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on.
It was a pleasure
Awesome.
to have you. And with that
Yeah.
being said, I think, Shanduk, it's time to roll out the credits. As usual, this episode will be released on the website and the podcasting platforms in a few weeks. And we will see you again next week, Tuesday.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you, Diego, and
Yeah.
everybody
Thank
tuning
you.
in. It was a pleasure. Like Moreno said, it was awesome. And with that,
Awesome.
we close it off. Thank you for watching Social Confoes. See you next time. Bye bye.